Crafty fam, it's Alex Vanover and welcome back to my craft room. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this gorgeous giant paper rose. If you use the same measurements that I show you how to use in Design Space, you'll end up with a paper rose that's about 13 or 14 inches wide or so. So let me show you what to do. So the first step to making your flower is inserting a template for the petals that you are going to use. This is a template that I bought from Etsy, which I will link in the description for you guys if you want to use the same template that I am using. And yes, it just comes as a single petal just like this. So I'm going to show you how to set up your rose so that you have everything you need to get started. So to start with the smallest petal, we are going to go over here to the width and we're going to make the smallest petal 5.75 inches wide. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better. So that's our smallest size petal, and we are going to duplicate this petal until we have 8 of these. So you'll just use the duplicate function on the right hand side and just press duplicate and count as you go. So we'll make sure that's 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so then we're going to duplicate it one more time, and then we're going to start on our medium petal. So for this petal, we are going to make our medium petal 6.5 inches wide, and then we're going to duplicate this one so that we have 12 of them. Okay, so let's count these and make sure we have 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Perfect. So then we're going to take our petal and duplicate it one more time and create the large size petal. So the large size petal, we're going to make 7.4 inches wide. And then we're going to duplicate it so that we have a total of 8. Okay, let's make sure we have 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. So these are the proportions of petals that I like to use. So there's a total of 3 petal sizes, and your smallest petal is 5.75 inches wide. You should have 8 of them. Your medium petal is 6.5 inches wide, and you should have 12 of them. And then your large petal is 7.4 inches wide, and you should have 8 of those total. Now, as you practice your giant paper roses and you decide that you like different proportions, feel free to use different numbers of the petals if you find something that you like a lot better. But the important thing for the method that I'm going to teach you is that you do need to cut your petals in multiples of 4. So all of the small, medium, and large petals need to be in multiples of 4 so that this will work. And when you download this template, if you decide to use this one, there's also a PDF that tells you some different measurements than what I use and some different numbers or proportions and things like that. So if you want to mess around and change up the proportions to make the giant paper rose just what you like, feel free to have fun and do that. So let's go to the Make It screen. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change my paper to 8.5 by 11 because that's the size of cardstock that I have. And you're going to see that this is going to be tons of mats, and that is definitely the case. Giant paper flowers, especially roses, are a lot of fun, but they are definitely tedious. And as you can see, I'm going to have to cut 28 mats. So it is definitely not a super quick project, but they are beautiful and totally worth it. So once you have your material size adjusted to the size of paper that you're going to be using, you can click continue. And then after your machine connects, that's when you want to choose the cut setting that you're going to use. I'm going to be using light cardstock because I am using 65-pound cardstock that I bought from Amazon, which I will also link in the description for you. And if you are doing large numbers of giant paper flowers, I have found that even though the colors are a little bit more limited from what I can find on Amazon, it's also a lot cheaper to buy it there. So I will definitely link that in the description, and I hope you guys can find something that is nice and reasonably priced if you're making a bunch of these for your wedding or for whatever the case may be, because as you can see, giant paper flowers take up a lot of paper. So let's hop over to my machine and I'll show you how to cut these roses. One pro tip for taking your petals off your mat without getting them to curl is to flip them over and to actually remove the mat from the paper instead of the other way around. This makes sure that they're a lot flatter and that they don't get curled by coming off the mat. once all of your petals are cut, you'll want to be sure to plug in your hot glue gun. I am using one of the narrow tipped hot glue guns from Surebonder, and I absolutely love this thing for making paper flowers because it helps me keep my hot glue a lot neater as I glue. So you'll need your hot glue gun and a ton of hot glue sticks because this project is definitely hot glue heavy. Then you'll want to sort all your petals into all 3 sizes that you just cut, and you'll want a bone folder. I will link this in the description. This is also one of my favorite tools for making paper flowers because I think that folding paper is just so much easier with one of these. But if you don't have a bone folder, you can also use a stick of hot glue in order to help fold your paper. So the first step is that you're going to curl all the edges of your paper flower inward. So basically you're just going to take your bone folder, and it's a similar technique to what you would use when you're curling like ribbon or something like that. You're just going to basically hold the bone folder really tight to the paper and push it through like this in order to curl in the edges. And you're going to do that on all of the petals that you cut. Once you have all the edges of your petals curled, then you're going to start gluing all of the petals of the same size into groups of 4. So for example, we'll start with our smaller petals, and all you're going to do is lay them out like this and glue them together. This is why I said during the screen capture that you were going to need to cut all your petals in groups of 4, because that's what you need to do in order to make this happen. So you don't need to use a ton of glue here, just enough to keep everything together. Just looks like this. And repeat this process with all the petals of all the same size. So all the small, all the medium, and all the large. And by the way, all of the edges need to be facing upward so that they're all facing in the same direction. So we'll bring these 2 up together and form a cone with these 2 opposite petals, because this first part is one of the most important pieces, in my opinion, in the entire rose. So we're gonna practice bringing the 2 together and creating a super tight, super small center that looks something like this. And do you see how the center of that is super tiny and tight? That, in my opinion, is how roses look very, very real. So that's the look that I am going for. So first I'm going to glue this side and just glue these little edges super, super small. And then take a moment and hold it down and allow it to set. And you'll kind of know when your hot glue is set when the heat starts to disappear a little bit. So if it gets a little hot on your fingers, you can kind of rub it onto your paper. And then you can start to bring the other petal around the other side. And so you kind of want to leave a little bit more space than you had before, but you still want it to be fairly tight around this rosebud. So I'm going to glue this petal first and then this one. Actually, I changed my mind. I think I'm gonna glue this petal first and then the other one. And it's it's really important that you hold your petals in and allow the glue to set before you move on to the other petals, because if you don't do that, when you get later into the flower, as the paper gets more weight to it, because there's more layers, the flower can actually fall apart. So make sure that you take your time when you make these flowers and you're not rushing through and not allowing the glue to set. So then on the second petal, I'm actually going to give a little bit of space so that you can see there's a little bit of separation on the bud, and glue it right there. And once you have this process down, it gets way, way easier. So then when we go to bring in the next two petals, we're gonna follow a similar process of just bringing the petals in and giving varying amounts of distance around the bud so that it begins to look like it's blooming. So I'll bring this one around first, and I'll put a little bit of glue here and a little bit of glue here so that we're giving the rosebud a little bit of separation between those petals. And sometimes I like to glue it one at a time if I'm unsure of the placement. That way, depending on where the first one ends up, I can kind of make adjustments as I go. I find that sometimes when I glue both sides of the petal at once, I don't end up with a shape that I really love. So then I can take this petal and glue it right here. And luckily, if you have a little bit of hot glue seep out like I do, especially in the bud, you're gonna be bringing the petals pretty close around the edge of it, so you're really not even gonna be able to see it when the flower is finished. All right, and it's time for the last petal of the bud. So I'm gonna try to give even more room in between the petals to make it something like this. All right, guys, and now we've got one more layer of the bud. So what we're gonna do is we're going to put some glue right on the bottom of where our bud has started, and we're gonna stick it right in the center of the next layer. In the other larger petal sizes, we're gonna start offsetting the way that the bottom sits, but in the bud, you want the bud petals to be super symmetrical. So actually, I'll put the glue right here on the bottom, like this, and then I'll set the bud right in the center. And we'll just continue the process of bringing opposite petals up toward the center. Guys, that's exactly what I was talking about. Getting impatient means that the flower can fall apart a little bit later. So you want to not be like me and go nice and slow. Alright guys, so here's the start of our rosebud. So now as we move into the medium and large petals, our technique is going to change just a little bit, but I'll show you what to do. So next you want to start moving on to your medium petals. But as you add groups of 4, you're actually going to flip them over so that the edges of the petals curl downward toward the table. And then you're going to glue the bottom of the bud and set it in the center. And I tend to use a lot of glue here on the bottom because I want the petals to be nice and secure together. I don't want to have any issues of separating. So you'll see it's kind of creating like a little bit of a cross there in the middle, and you're just going to set that directly in the middle of those medium petals. So we'll give that a second to set before we move on, but I'll explain how we're gonna do the medium and large petals, because from here on out, even though the technique is different, it's the same on both the medium and the large petals. So we're actually gonna bring the petals up toward the bud still, but you'll notice that the edges are curled in the opposite direction. And the reason for that is because we wanna add movement into these petals each time that we glue them so that it looks more realistic like a real rose. So when you're bringing the petals up, you wanna kind of put a finger in the middle as well as 2 fingers on the opposite side, and we're actually gonna glue it like this. And that way you're actually gluing the movement into the paper so that it looks very real. And we're actually gonna glue a lot lower on the petal as well so that the top is a little more free to kind of move around and look realistic. So hope that makes sense, but I'll show you guys what I mean as we go. So we'll start with this petal here, and I'm gonna add glue, like I said, very low compared to the way that we did before. We're gonna bring it up and just kind of lay that petal against the flower and kind of let it hit wherever it wants. So we'll hold those down before we do the opposite side. We're always gonna work in opposites. That way the opposites are kind of symmetrical. Now, as you can see, it kind of looks like the flower is starting to open, which is exactly what we are looking for. There's glue strings everywhere, but that's okay. You can always go back at the end and get rid of those. So then we'll rotate the flower and follow the same process on the opposite side, going like this. You also want to watch for areas like this where you start to get lines in your petals because it makes them look a little bit less natural. So I like to gently kind of push on the petal and try to massage those lines out just so that they don't end up looking quite so harsh. You'll actually be kind of surprised by how moldable the paper is as you start to work with it. And typically you can work those out. So just be watching for those as you go. So then as you add your second layer of medium flowers, I'll show you what I mean by offsetting. So here's another group of 4, and I'm going to lay those edges so that they're curling downward. And since I can see that my cross is following this way and this way, I'm going to offset it like this so that I'm kind of crossing it over. So I'll flip it over and show you what I mean. So instead of going like this, we're gonna offset the bottom like this so that the flowers start entering from different angles, if you will, on the rows. And you'll have glue strings for days. That's just the nature of working with hot glue. So I'm actually gonna stick the glue onto the bud this time, just to make sure that I stick it in the right spot down onto my petals. We'll give that a moment to set before we keep going. And I know this looks like a lot of petals, but since we put the petals together in groups of 4, it doesn't take nearly as long when doing it this way, which I love. I think that really helps save us on a lot of time. All right, so now we're just gonna follow the same technique of bringing the flower up like this and adding it in waves. But you'll notice that as we start to get further out on the flower, you're gonna add the glue lower and lower onto the petal. And you kind of wanna be careful here because there's gonna start being a lot more weight onto the flower. So you may end up having to use more glue or kind of adjust your technique as you go. And I hope you guys have your fingers kind of desensitized to hot glue. If you do not, be very, very careful because hot glue can be really, really hot even through the paper. So I have been crafting for long enough now that my fingers aren't too bothered by hot glue, but just make sure that you're paying attention to that. You're not holding in one spot too long. If it starts to hurt, like I said, just kind of rub the area with the glue and that will allow it to set without burning you. As the flower gets really, really large and it's hard to hold, sometimes it's good to kind of go in and grab it by the bud in order to move it around. That sometimes makes it a little bit easier for me. One last petal, y'all, and then we're all done. All right, so this one is gonna be the most challenging because I kind of have this concave section right here. So this one's gonna be the most challenging, but we'll save the best for last. All right, actually, maybe we'll flip it over and glue it a little bit. All right, y'all, and here is the finished giant paper rose. If you guys are gonna be hanging these on the wall, which I bet you are, here's how I suggest you add something to attach them to the wall. So the way that I like to do it is to use a little piece of string like this, or twine or ribbon, and I like to glue it like this in a loop on the back of my flower. So you would glue here and here, and then let this be free. And then I like to put command hooks on the wall so that I don't damage the wall at all. And then you can hook the flower onto the hook and then take it on and off as you please. There are so many different ways to use giant paper roses, including using them at bridal showers, at weddings, and even on the walls of baby nurseries. So if you decide to make a giant paper flower and you decide to post it on Instagram, I would love for you to use the hashtag DIYAlex so that I can see your amazing creations. And if you haven't already, please make sure to connect with me at DIYAlexVanover on all of the social media platforms that you're on, because I love to meet you guys and to see your amazing work. I'll also link all of my profiles down in the description in case you want a super easy link to get connected. And if you want to learn more about the different ways that you can craft with cardstock and make different kinds of paper flowers, click right here to check out my paper flower playlist. And if you haven't already, please click right here to subscribe to the DIYAlex YouTube channel. Scroll down just a little bit and ring the bell right next to subscribe, and select all notifications from the dropdown so that you never miss when I upload a new video Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I hope we can craft again soon.